know what mistake I have made? No? Is the Prime Minister of Italy here in the room? Please stand up. Or the CEO of Fiat? Not here. Okay, then maybe I'm dressed poorly for the occasion. And one of the first things that you need to do as an investigative journalist is get people to relax. And one of the ways you get people to relax is by what you're wearing. And you can wear the wrong clothes and you can intimidate people. You can be dressed too high or dressed too low. If you go to see the CEO of a major corporation and you're wearing torn blue jeans and a ragged shirt and you look dirty and you haven't washed in 3 weeks, it might not be considered appropriate. And I think what I'm wearing isn't appropriate, so I'm going to take off my tie. And I hope that at some point or another they get the thing fixed. And I think I'm even going to put on a different shirt. Because I think you guys should relax when I'm talking. And you know, sometimes the hardest thing that you can do as a journalist is get people to relax. That if you want to go and meet somebody who's afraid to meet you, maybe he works for a spy service or he works for a major corporation, he doesn't want anybody to know that you're talking to him, then maybe what you need to do is to write the person a letter and take it to his house. Are we got this thing fixed now? And so anyway, I think that it's more appropriate for me to be wearing a t-shirt than to be wearing a coat and tie. Or maybe we're in Italy, so I'll add a little bit of fashion. And now we can do this way. Am I going to have a PowerPoint? Or anyway, first thing to do is to get people to relax. And I hope that you all are relaxed. I'm going to sit down for a second. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is, this was under the title, First Impressions Count. And what we need to do is we need to create a good first impression. We need to think about who we're talking to, what message we want to give that person. And just as I thought about who you guys are and who I'm going to be talking to before I came here, and I even went out and bought this t-shirt so that I would fit the part, I think you guys, you know, we all need to think about who we're going to talk to and dress accordingly. I mean, it's a very, very cheap way to get people to relax in the end. Simon, people who were here before, Simon did a great talk about crowdsourcing and said a lot about correctiv.org. Our thing, I'm going to say less about it. We're a nonprofit investigative newsroom. We do public interest journalism. I think the goals of investigative journalism for me are to get people to say a few things like, I didn't know that. That's important, and this has to change. That we want people to be surprised by stories, to think, really, that's important. We should be talking about this. And that's our job as investigative journalists, is to basically create topics to find topics that are important and present the information to people in a way that they can understand it, and that you can begin a discussion. It's one of the difference between what we do and what intelligence services do or police do and stuff like that, is that as journalists, we can take information and put it in front of people and get them to actually talk about it in a meaningful way, because we put everything out there to be criticized, to be fact-checked by the public, by people who are critical of what we say, and it makes things much more believable. We go for scoops, and scoops, let's face it, if you're going to spend a couple months working on a story, it better be a scoop, because why should you spend 2 months doing a story that somebody has already done pretty well before in another media? On the other hand, for the topic of this discussion, which is how to make the bad guys talk, being the first is really, really important, because when you are the first, you always get the bad guy to talk. He wants to know if he's going to go to jail. And so what you need to do is to figure out the story that you want to tell. It should be a story that hasn't been told before. And then you need to figure out all of the facts that, that you think are important, and get them together without the bad guy that you want to write about, without them even knowing that you're working on the story, because ultimately you want to confront this person and surprise them so that they have no idea. Somebody's got, it's on this side. Okay. Okay, how do I, okay, wait a second. I need to get this. Okay. I want to get this in a cell. Okay. I don't have a mouse. Oh, here it is. Anyway, we want to go for scoops, because you need scoops, because we want to be first when we confront the people. If we're first, they'll answer our questions. If we're somebody who comes along 3 weeks later, they're probably not going to have time for us. And we want people to take the time to talk to us. Okay, now do I have, let's see if this works. No. Simon, this is,
so what you need?
I just need to be able to click here and get it to go to the next screen.
No. Set keynote.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Okay, so go for scoops. Why is this? Okay. Another thing is that investigative journalism is active. It's not passive. That we don't wait for whistleblowers to come to us. We go out and we get stories where there is no whistleblower, where there is nobody out there who wants to give us the story. We want to go and get stories that are new, so that you know, we can start these topics. For me, whistleblowers, to a certain extent, are a special form of press office. And I'm just not interested in doing press office journalism. I want to do active journalism where I'm going out and trying to get stories that aren't there, and there's nobody who's going to give it to me. Why do we want to speak to criminals? Well, first of all, to prevent a lawsuit. They also add credibility to the story, and it adds color to the story. It makes it more interesting to read. This is a story that I did some years ago. One of the most boring parts of a lot of stories is the comment that you get at the end of the story, where everybody says, I didn't do it, and I didn't do it. And usually you end up talking to lawyers. And you see this at the top of the story, where Mr. Hemming's lawyer says he never violated any laws, and somebody else's lawyer said she did nothing wrong. But then we get down to one of the main characters in the case, and he says, we will find you, we will get you. This made my story. I thought when I saw that, when he said that to me, actually I was telephoning with him at his office in Singapore. You know, I realized this was pretty close to what we need at the end of the story. It didn't quite make the end of the story. One of the things that you have to, the kicker of the story, one of the things that you have to do is you never promise anybody confidentiality. That if you say, okay, let's go off the record or something like that, you're basically giving witnesses a veto over your story. It's much better to find a new witness than to give somebody a veto. one example is for this story where the person said, "We will find you, we will get you." One of the people who was very helpful for the story was a businessman who was building devices that can be used for nuclear weapons. And he sold a lot of them for a lot of money, for I think $80,000 or something like that, to some people who the police anyway think were trying to ship them to Iran. And so he gave me this silly little quote. He says, "It's hard to put your ethics in front of your pocketbook." But I never promised him anything. And so what I was able to do was to answer his thing and to say, "But wait a second, you never did put your ethics in front of your pocketbook. You actually waited until you had sold the instruments, had made all of the money, and then you called the police." So is he really putting his ethics in front of the pocketbook? I think that these kind of things really make the story and make people think and make it memorable. And so what you need to do is to realize there's no good guys. In really, really good stories, there are no good guys. That we did at Corrective last year a story about MH17, and that one of the great things about that story, there were no good guys in it. Why do we give the crook a voice? Well, the first one who talks to him will get the interview. Everybody else will get no comment and turned down. We don't go off the record. We keep control of the story. And comment adds value to the story in other ways. For example, this is a story about a mafia organization that kidnapped a person and forced him to sign over $1 million in, at least allegedly forced him to sign over $1 million worth of shares in a major hotel. And so I ended up having to get comment from the chief gangster. And so I was able to figure out what his cell number was, and I called him on his cell phone, and I did an interview with him. And one of the things that he said was, one of the allegations was that he needed $1 million to help depose the Georgian president. And he, on the one hand, in the interview, confirmed a lot of the allegations that were there by saying, "I don't know why they were saying this," which says, yes, he did say it. But on the other hand, one of the fun things that he said was, $1 million is a lot of money to pay for somebody you don't like. And I put that as the kicker of the story because I just think that's fun. So we give the crooks a voice. We use interviews, we use correspondence, we use photos, we use family documents. You have to figure out any way you can to give. One of the difficult people to give a voice to, for example, is Putin. And I've done a lot of stories about Putin, and one of the ways that I found to give him a voice was by collecting letters that his wife wrote. She has a lot of pen pals that she writes to, and so I went around and was collecting these letters and analyzing them. And last year on Corrective website, we did a look at Putin, and one of the things that we were doing was looking through the letters that his wife wrote and using that to basically get an inside look at how he thinks and how he works. How do we investigate? We talk to everyone, we get the documents, and then we confront. I've talked a little bit about confronting. One of the investigations that I did a few years ago was about this gentleman, Mohammed Fakihi. He's a Saudi diplomat based in Germany. He was asked to leave the country because of his alleged involvement in the September 2001 attacks. And initially, I thought it was going to be a rather easy investigation because he was also the cultural attaché at the embassy, and cultural attachés are involved in intercultural dialogue. And I thought there would be a lot of Germans who had contact with him, and it would be quite easy to find out. So some of the things that we do is we look for victims, courts, NGOs, universities, anybody who would have information about these people. We conduct interviews, and we do quick hit stories to try and open up sources. This is a story that I did in the Wall Street Journal. If you read it, it reads more like advertising than a news story. It basically says, if you are next of kin, if somebody in your family died in the September 11 attacks, you have rights in Germany, access to documents that the US government will not give you. And if you're lucky, which I was, this was the first 100 binders of information that we got of police and intelligence records. We ended up getting, I think, close to 400 binders from Germany. We did the same thing in Spain and a few other countries. And so we got several 100,000 pages of documents that otherwise would be under seal. One of the things that we found in the evidence was information about Mr. Fakihi, who I was investigating. This is his business card, which was found at the home of one of the people who ultimately was convicted of involvement in the September 11 attacks in Germany. But in order to proceed with the investigation, what you have to do is brainstorm a little bit. Who knew what was going on, who helped, and where are their victims? Who can help us? Who can tell us something? And so one of the things that I realized was important to Mr. Fakihi was that in the summer of 2002, the Secretary General of the Muslim World League, Abdallah al-Turki, was in Germany. And Mr. Fakihi, I thought, would have to organize it. And so I thought, well, it's well known, or it's documented anyway, who participated in these events. And so I went around and got the participants lists at the different events. Couldn't find anybody there who remembered Mr. Fakihi being around. Then I got the idea to go around to other Saudi embassies in Germany, first of all in the German embassy, but then other ones in other European capitals, trying to collect any kind of documents that Mr. Fakihi might have written. In the Netherlands, I found a document which you can see here in this story. It actually was a poem that was written by a diplomat to the Interior Minister of Saudi Arabia. And so I couldn't read it because it was in Arabic, so I flew to London to a friend of mine who works for a Saudi human rights organization. And he looked at it and he laughed and he said, yeah, this is a letter written on Saudi embassy stationery, but it's a poem, it's not a letter. And I said, well, is it good poetry? And he said, no, it's terrible. So I flew back to The Hague, where actually this letter was written, and I found the diplomat. And I said, why are you writing poems to the Interior Minister of Saudi Arabia? And he said, well, if you want to get anything done in Saudi Arabia, you need to have the signature of somebody in the Saudi royal family. And they're all busy. They're out on their yachts in the Red Sea, or they're on their farms riding camels or horses or something. They're never in their office. So if you want to get them to actually read your letters, you have to do something extra. And as a poor public servant, I can't put money in the envelope to get them to read it, so I write poems. Turns out the Saudi ambassador to Great Britain at some point published a book containing the poems that he wrote as diplomatic dispatches to the foreign ministry in Saudi Arabia. I returned to Germany. I still didn't have any letters from Mr. Fakihi, but I had a question, and that was, what was Mr. Fakihi's trick for getting his letters read? And I discovered that he actually had his letters written in an archaic form of Arabic, which basically died out at the end of the Middle Ages, but is still used in the Saudi royal court. But he couldn't actually write in this style himself. So he had somebody else who did it for him. And when I heard that, I realized there must be a computer somewhere in Berlin with all of his letters on it. And so I looked for the computer, and when I found it, I had all of his correspondence. And so we went through this computer, and this is a funding application for a mosque in Berlin that Mr. Fakihi filed. So I had his voice in his business. And in this letter that you see there, he says that we need to have this mosque as a base for when there's conflicts between Muslims and others. I had it actually translated by 3 different people because I wanted to know whether or not they were talking about violence of arms or so physical violence, or whether they were just talking about disagreements. In the end, I decided not to say that there was actual violence involved because I couldn't prove it. And I think that by pushing the thing and trying to put words in the person's mouth, it's better just to say the minimum that you can back up. And so that's what I did, is I did not say that he was calling for war in Germany. But we were able to get to the heart of him by getting his documents. Who do we want to avoid? We want to avoid other journalists, we want to avoid the police, and we want to avoid spy services and stuff. Everybody, all these are organizations who want to steal your investigations and go with it themselves. Then it's the big question of how do you approach these people? Do you go in with your business card? Do you go undercover? Or do you use a cover story? I like to go in with my business card in hand, but sometimes you do use a cover story. One of the things that is important in journalism to remember is that no, if you ask a question and somebody says, no, I can't help you, it's next to impossible to get them later to change that to a yes. It's a matter of pride. They're not going to just turn around and say, okay, yeah, do it. I mean, you can spend weeks or months trying to turn a no into a yes. So never ask a question that will lead to a no. If you're absolutely certain the person is going to say, no, I'm not going to give you those documents, then don't ask them. Another thing that you have to remember is that there's yes people and there's no people. There's an awful lot of people in the world who can say no and can prevent you from getting the information that you want. The secretary of an important person can prevent you from speaking to them. They can just refuse to relay your request. On the other hand, there may be only one person in the world who can actually give you the information that you want. And so part of what you need to do as an investigative journalist is find that one person and develop a strategy for getting that person to help you, which is, for example, with the Fakihi investigation, it was one of those cases, who could actually get me what I wanted? I wanted that computer, for example. How do you get it? You need a strategy. You have to come up with a strategy. And in that case, it involved actually getting different people to do different things. One of the best things to work with are unwilling partners. This document was, for me, rather interesting because it's a court verdict that was under seal. It was kept under wraps. It was never formally made public, in which the German engineering firm Siemens agreed to pay more than 200 million euros in penalties on the condition that the agreement or the verdict would remain sealed. I, of course, was very interested in knowing why it was under seal, and I went to the court and asked if I could have a copy of the document. They said no. I went to the company and said, I'd like a copy of the verdict, and they said no. They said, you have to go to the court. I said, I talked to the court, and they said, you're the one who decides. And I said, well, we don't see any need to make it public. And I said, you know, I'm really glad that you have that opinion, because that means we're going to get it exclusively. And I think it took me 6 weeks, but it turns out it contained the names and the amounts of money that bribes in a bunch of different countries got from Siemens. And so we actually put this on our website and published the details. Siemens can afford to lose its employees, to fire its employees. It can afford to do a lot of things. What it cannot afford to do is to embarrass its customers. And so they did not want people to know who specifically they were giving bribes to in different countries. And anyway, so I went after this, and then when we had it, we posted it online. I think the Archbishop of Lagos in Nigeria, when the story came out, in his Christmas message, he said that he saw the hands of God behind this story, that it was the first time in Nigeria that the names of the bribe recipients, and I think we named 4 ministers who got money, how much money they got, on what date, who approved it on the Siemens side, who was the agent who gave it to them, what was it for. We had all of those details that we made public. How do you identify sources? One of the things you need to do is to just ask your interview partners to suggest news sources. That usually, if you have a good source, that person will know other people, and so you ask them to lead you to the next step. And so what you can do is you can sort of follow a chain of links of a network, of a personal network of different people, and get to people who know more and more information. And because you're always working from outside inward, that in a major investigation, in the end, you're going to have to confront these people, like this Georgian, alleged Georgian mobster who I was talking to. In the end, you're going to have to talk to him, but you cannot talk to him in the beginning and say, are you a mobster, or something like that. You have to go in and ask him. When we were talking about this $1 million, for example, I said to him, you know, it has to have been personal. What's going on? It must have been personal. He said, what do you mean personal? And I said, you know, look, you spent $1 million, excuse me, to try and depose the Georgian president. That's an awful lot of money. And he said, yeah, it's a lot of money to spend on somebody you hate. So what you need to do is you have to be there with information that the guy has never been asked before, and get them to comment on things that are important. One of the things that I like to do is to write introductory letters. Email, by the way, is not a letter. One of the things that we were talking before about, you know, the no and the yes things, and never allow or ask a question where you think the answer is going to be no. A lot of times when you're trying to get somebody to help with the investigation, their initial reaction is going to be no. So if you send them an email, they'll write instantly back, sorry, I don't have any time. If you lick a stamp, put it on an envelope, I know this is really archaic these days, but if you actually do that and put the letter in the mail, that letter very often will sit on the coffee table of the person who you're trying to approach. You can have spent weeks writing this letter, doing research for it, figuring out what you need to tell this person in order to get their assistance. And more or less every time I write one of these letters, the people ultimately, they'll say, oh, yeah, that sat on my table for 5 or 6 days, and finally I just decided I'll call you. And so it's very powerful. That no never got spoken. They do not lose face. And so that's one thing about letters are really important. One of the investigations that I had a lot of fun with was with Putin and Dresdner Bank. One of the problems with it was that the lawyers in New York at the time I was doing it said, yeah, he's a president, President Nixon in the US, that we had for the Watergate, they wanted triple sources for anybody who, for any allegations that you're making against a sitting president. And oh, by the way, it all has to be on the record, which meant I needed to have the same level of surety that the Washington Post had, but I wasn't allowed to have a deep throat. I could only use people who would actually allow their names to be published. So when you're in a situation like that, you have to find a strategy for getting people to talk. And one of the things that you can do is force Putin to admit something, or force the CEO of Dresdner Bank to admit something. And so that is what I wanted to do. And one of the things that I did was I contacted the CEO, which in German is called the spokesperson for the board, but he's actually the CEO of Dresdner Bank. And I said, I want to do an interview with you about your successful expansion to Eastern Europe of business. And he wanted to be a hero, celebrated in the news as being the guy who got his bank all of this business in Eastern Europe. And so we went to this interview, I think it was at 1 p.m. On a weekday in Frankfurt at the Dresdner Bank office. And at the same time I went into this meeting, we also faxed the same questions to Putin's office in the Kremlin. During the meeting with the CEO of Dresdner Bank, my strategy was to get him to tell me as much as he would tell me, and just to get as much information in my notebook, in my notes, as I could get. And so I spent, I guess, 60, 70 minutes doing the interview that he wanted to give, and he told me he answered every question in detail. And so a lot of the things that might have been hard to get other people to admit to, he was admitting to. And in the end, I began talking about the money that Dresdner Bank was paying to Putin and paying for Putin. And he confirmed 3 of these payments. The next day, so after the third question, he said, oh, but you're not really planning to write about this stuff. And I said, well, that's why we're here. So he threw me out. The same questions we also sent to Putin at the same time, so that this is going on at the same time. The next morning, normally when you write to Putin's office, you wait about 3 or 4 weeks, and then you get a response of no comment, if you get anything. In this case, it was kind of personal, and so the Putin's chief of staff ended up calling the Wall Street Journal bureau chief in Moscow and said, yeah, Mr. Crawford, he's a little bit confused, and he just doesn't have his facts straight and stuff like this. So what we did was we took the same questions, preceded them with the thing Dresdner Bank's CEO Bernhard Walter said, boom, and then we asked it the same questions again, sent him back to the Kremlin 2 days later. Then they had the choice of either admitting what we had said and giving their spin to it, or denying it, even though Dresdner Bank was confirming this stuff. And so in the end, they decided to give their spin on it. So our lawyers in New York then said, okay, well, if Putin and Dresdner Bank are both admitting at least these aspects of the story, then we can run with the story. And so we were able to get the people who were helping us, that were providing all of this stuff, including the letters that I showed one of the letters before of Putin's wife. That was one of the key things that I needed to get the story rolling. But anyway, so by, I guess the CEO, the bank CEO, I think he was very, very upset with me afterwards, because he thought I had tricked him. I should have told him that the story was about bribes and not said that it's only about his expansion. I think it was about his expansion, but sometimes you have to help yourself. The strategy: question Putin's buddies, investigate his partner, and get access to document troves. I think I discussed a little bit about that. We caught him off guard. Fill your notebook, then ask about the money. This is the story that we ran. We did a series of stories. This was also talking about the CEO of the bank and his activities as a East German spy. Another story that we did was about Rosukrenego and Gazprom. Rosukrenego is one of the energy firms in the Ukraine. A few years ago, it was the main vehicle for shifting gas between Russia and Western Europe via the Ukraine. But the ownership was in doubt, that it was being held, 50% of the shares were held in trust by Raiffeisen Investment, an Austrian-based bank. And so we thought, how do we crack this? How do we force out the secret owner of this thing? And one of the things that we did was started investigating the role of Raiffeisen Investment. And when we did that, we did several stories about it, organized crime investigations against the bank, and in the end, they couldn't take the heat. And I got a phone call from the president of the bank, and he said, can you be in London tomorrow at 10 in the morning? If you are, you can have an interview with the secret owner of Rosukrenego. And I said, I'll be there. And so I flew in. Also, one of my colleagues from Russia flew in, and we did an interview with Firtash, the secret owner. And so basically, by making it too hot for the trustee, in this case the bank, we were able to flush the secret owner out into the open. Hewlett-Packard was involved with bribing in several different countries. They admitted this in U.S. court. Possible trial in Germany is still under review. One of the things that we had to do was confront the alleged perpetrators, and they, of course, reacted massively. One of the things that they did was one of them, a Hewlett-Packard vice president, got an injunction against me in a Hamburg court. I used that injunction in the criminal investigation court in Leipzig to intervene in the trial as a co-plaintiff, similar to actually what I did for the September 11 files, and basically got access to the files there, and so we were able to get some of the key files out of that court thing, which allowed us to talk about bribes that Hewlett-Packard was paying to Russian spies and details of Putin's power grab. So in essence, by using the power of confrontation, in essence just scaring the devil out of these people, you can force them to actually come out and say things that they don't want to say. Siemens, for example, I gave the example before of releasing the names of its people. Before that, they would always try to say no comment and didn't want to talk to me because they considered me to be a nuisance. After that, they always returned my calls and took me seriously. In the end, they actually offered me a job to write a book about the Siemens scandal, and actually the people who were charged with the crime separately asked me to write a book about them. I turned both of those offers down. But it just shows that if you go after the people hard, get the information first, confront them first, you can force people to talk who don't want to talk to you. And this generally ends up being the best stuff that you have in your story. And now I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah. I can't hear you, so you have to speak louder.
So would you say that your only advantage is yours, the surprise, so you make your interview partner feel comfortable, and then boom, you have those documents and confront them?
I wouldn't, my problem was the word only, that it's one of the tools that you have. I mean, basically what you have to do is all of these different things that I was talking about, you have to use all of them. And you have to have a different strategy for everything that you go after. That I've gone after a lot of troves of documents and information and stuff like that. It's never been the same, it's always different. And you just have to think, what do you need to move? How can you convince people to assist you? And sometimes it's, you know, getting recommendations and then going over via networks and stuff that, you know, somebody who says, yeah, I've worked with this journalist before, you can trust him. Sometimes it's just wearing the proper clothes and meeting them at the right place. It's, you know, it's different every time, but certainly surprise and terror are two helpful things.
Terror?
Yeah, wait, if you scare the people so much that there was another German bank that you know, was stonewalling me and was lying to me, and I realized, you're lying to me. And then I said to him, you know, you have a footprint in the United States. Your bank is doing business there. By lying to the press, you're, you know, violating U.S. Financial laws. And then the spokesman thought about it for a second, and then he admitted that I think a member of his his management board had been forced to resign because of money laundering in Russia. So, you know, he didn't want to admit that before, but, you know, if you just go after him and say, look, you know, do you really want to take this position if you're breaking a law? But, you know, most journalists won't do this because they want interviews with the CEO of the bank later, and I don't care about those interviews. Yeah.
Peter Jepsen from Germany. If I remember correctly, you said there are no good guys in a good story. So you never did a story on an honest good guy fighting a big corporation or something like this?
Oh, yeah, I've done those stories before. It doesn't happen very often. But I think the best stories are stories in which there are no good guys, because then, you know, you can just go after everything. That people, let's face it, news, scoops, and stuff like that are not about the world is wonderful and friendly and nothing is wrong. You know, the more pressing, you know, the situation is, because everything is wrong, you know, the greater the need for investigations. And so you look for something where as much is wrong as possible. Yeah? Or, I don't know who has a microphone.
Yeah, it's here. I'll try to be concrete.
Can you put the microphone closer to your mouth?
For example, how would you approach to the guy who committed war crimes 20 years ago, and since then he became a musician, very popular in his field, and he was never prosecuted, and of course he's trying to hide his past. So what would you do?
I'm not sure if I would want to do that story, because I would assume it's already been told.
No.
At least part of it would have to have been told if he was a suspected war crimes person. If he's actually, you know, a war criminal and he, I would collect everything I knew about the crime. I would collect everything that I knew about this person. I would try and, you know, prevent him from knowing that I'm investigating him, and then when I had everything and I knew the story, then I would go and confront this person and, And if, in fact, I'm the first person to talk to him about this, it's inevitable that they're going to want to at least keep the conversation going until they know how much I know. And I have no interest in telling them everything that I know, but generally, if you're the first person to confront somebody, they will talk to you.
But can I ask just one small question? Would you, in such a situation, would you use a false reason, motivation for your interview? Like, I want to talk to you about your musical career or whatever, instead of the real motive.
Well, certainly you would want to be talking about the musical career as part of the thing. I mean, it wouldn't be the most important thing that you wanted to talk to him about, but there's no reason to say you want to talk about the musical, or not to say that you want to talk about the musical career. Of course you want to talk about that, and you also want to talk about the war crimes, but you don't have to give them a long list of everything you want to talk about. You need to get the microphone.
Yes, I have the
Yeah,
microphone.
but
So
you've got the microphone now.
I got the microphone. So, well, obviously you're a man. Do you have any advice how a woman could do investigative journalism? Because I could see a difference on how to approach people, or how some people would approach you. Some sources would be a bit rather either rude or like even with some sexual nuances. What would you advise?
It was difficult to understand you acoustically.
Soll ich das auf
Can you
Deutsch
just
sagen?
repeat the question? It was hard to understand.
Okay, no, I'm just saying that if you have any advice for a woman to do investigative journalism, because I guess a source, I mean, I'm not guessing, I have experience that a source just react a bit different.
So for the problems of women and
Yes,
being...
exactly.
Okay, I haven't been in that situation. But in general, you know, I think one of the key things is never to get involved with anybody who you're working with journalistically. And if somebody, you know, starts to make demands or starts to make things, I would just drop them instantly as a source and would look for a different one. That one of the slides that I ended up jumping over was one that, you know, never give the source power over you, and never give them the power to veto a story, and certainly never give them the power to think that they control you and can force you to do something. If they're trying to do that, then they're not going to be a reliable source. That if they're going to do that with you, then they're going to lie to you. And why spend time dealing with somebody who's going to lie to you? I've had a colleague in Washington, D.C., and she once said to me that, you know, she gets lied to all the time by her sources. And I said, well, you know, I don't. And she said, well, you probably don't have very many sources. And I thought about it, and I think the thing is that if somebody lies to me, then I drop them as a source and I look for somebody else. She is in a slightly different position because she needs to go and talk to certain press officers and things like this again and again and again, whereas I'm basically changing my topic quite often. And so I don't need to keep going back to the same people. But in essence, if somebody starts trying to pull something funny like that, I drop them and look for somebody who's better.
Yeah, I had a question about sourcing as well. So you mentioned that you should keep your sources on the record all the time, but don't you risk like losing information because you don't allow your source to say something anonymously? That could actually help the story. So you would just have to keep your source anonymous, but you would have valuable information at the end.
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, if you're doing an investigative story, in the end you'll know more than your sources. That it's just the nature of the thing. You're spending weeks or months working on a story, and you'll know more. You don't need this one source to tell you everything. And I would rather have that person on the record saying stuff that I can use. It's just a waste of my time to be sitting there with somebody who tells me a lot of stuff that I can't use because it's not going into the story. He's saying, you know, I'm not there for this information. And so we had this situation recently in the German parliament where this one member of parliament was saying, well, you know, why don't we turn this, you know, tape recorder off and I'll be able to tell you more. And I said, no, I want to leave it on. And my experience is that the people will always ask you to go off the record, but they'll say the exact same things to you off the record that they'll say to national television on the record because it's on television, 20 minutes later or something like that. Don't go off the record. Just say, think about what you're saying and we'll go with it. That there's no reason, and a lot of people try to use this in order to get a veto over what you say, that if you allow them to go off the record, then later they'll say, I told you that. Well, you may have 10 sources that said the same thing to you, and do you really want to get into an argument with them whether you got the information from them or whether you got it from somebody else? Just forget it. Just say, no, sorry, I'm not willing to do that. Then we can just say what you're willing to say, and then I'll leave. Then at least you still have they don't have a veto over you. Don't give anybody a veto over your story.
First, thank you for your presentation. I really like the tie and shirt trick. That's a good icebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
I came to your session a bit intrigued when I read Bad Guys. I said to myself, who the hell are the bad guys? Who decide who is the bad guys?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in nowadays, in time of war and conflict, there are no baddies and goodies.
Mm.
And has it happened to you that you started an investigative story, and then the narrative has changed and the bad guys is not that bad, or is as bad as the others? That the bad guys turn the good guys. And second point, also about investigating and interviewing bad guys. Is it always, does that bring always like, does that bring always something? Like when you decide to interview like people like Bashar al-Assad, for example, or other Al-Qaeda's leaders, and is it not giving them a platform? Is it not giving them a platform so that they can spread their ideology, or they will keep denying what they are doing? And I'm always like embarrassed by watching interviews of Western journalists going to interview Assad.
Mm-hmm.
That for me, that giving them legitimacy that they are looking for and giving them a platform. So is it good? Is it always good or not to interview bad guys?
Okay. Second question first. I'm not a big fan of long quotes. I don't want to give people platforms. I think that I can write the sentence better than somebody I'm interviewing can spontaneously say something. It's generally, it doesn't really fit the story. So what I would like to do is to synthesize the information and take out of it what's important that that person is saying, and then put it into context. The way I showed with this CEO of this company, which was making these devices that are needed for nuclear weapons, and said, he said, you can't expect him to put his, it's difficult for him to put his pocketbook in front of, or his ethics in front of his pocketbook, in front of his finances. When indeed, he wasn't doing that at all. And so, I let him say that, but then I also said, hey, wait a second, he never did that. And so what you need to do is to provide that context, and by not allowing the people control over your story, you can do that. As far as good guys and bad guys, and do you really have them pinned down at the beginning of the story? Let's face it, if I know the story, if I have a story that, you know, I know that this is what went wrong in this tragedy, and I'm absolutely sure I know from A to Z what happened, I'm not going to do that investigation. Why should I do it? If I know it, everybody else knows it. And probably somebody else has written about it. I'm not going to spend weeks or months working on an investigation when everybody knows the answer. I want people at the end to say, I didn't know that. Oh, that's important. These are the things I want them to say, and you know, everybody knows that, you know, this person is a good guy, or everybody knows that that person is a bad guy. That's not a surprise. I want to provide something new. It has to be what I call value-added journalism. It has to be something that basically rolls the ball forward and allows a sensible discussion about a topic that hasn't been discussed before. That's what I want. And you know, those aren't the topics that everybody knows what actually happened. A lot of times people will come to me and will say, you know, look, you know, this is a terrible tragedy that happened, or this problem in hospitals or something like that. But it's something that's been written about 20 times and that everybody knows is kind of wrong. They don't need me to be the 21st person to write about that. That if somebody else has done it, and probably somebody's done a fantastic job writing about that just 6 months before or something like that, that's not investigative journalism as far as I'm concerned. That's maybe something that could be put on the website of a NGO or something, but it's not what I want to be doing. I have to end? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been fun talking to you.